Hello, and welcome back to Dave's Delights. I'm Dave, and as always, I'm delighted to be here with you. And today, it extra delights me because I've got my first request for a topic. Somebody wanted to know how to make bread, and is it easy? And the first question is, yes, bread is very easy to make. But in reality, there's very few ingredients. It's just a matter of being very precise with what your ingredients are. Every time I try to feel the amount of things, it always goes awry. So if we follow our instructions exactly, we should have good bread when we're done. Now, bread being kind of the original food, when we stopped being hunters and gatherers and started being farmers, we switched to having loaves of bread. It was money. It was what you got paid in, either the raw grain or the finished bread. And it's still something we eat daily today. It's probably one of the most staple crops that we have. So in making bread, there's a couple of things that you need. It's really not a lot of ingredients, although you can add lots more depending on how fancy you want to be with the bread. So first off, you need 4.5 to 5 cups of bread flour. I mean, any flour will do, but that's why they call it bread flour. This is sifted bread flour, and I have it broken into 2 batches. 2 cups, 2 cups, and then I've got extra over there if I need it. You have 2 cups of warm water, a teaspoon of sugar, and 2 tablespoons of active dry yeast, which I have here. Those are all inside the warm water, and that's waking up the yeast, so it's getting ready to go. And then I have a teaspoon of salt and a teaspoon of cornmeal, which is for later in the process. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take 2 cups of this bread flour, and that's going to go into my mixer. Oh, my beautiful mixer. And then goes the 2 teaspoons of salt. Now I'm going to use this mixer rather than dirtying something else since I'm already in my mixer. And just give this a quick blend. So that way the salt is distributed evenly. But what I've learned the hard way is if you don't do this first, you end up having one salty part of bread and the rest of the bread doesn't quite taste right. Alright, so that's nicely mixed. We can pop this back up. Fitting comes off just like that. And now I'm going to a bread hook. And I'm going to introduce the yeast, the water, and the sugar. And now we're going to stir this together. But that 2 cups isn't going to be enough. We have to keep adding flour until we get to the level that looks like it's making kind of a loose dough. Enough that it is actually dough and not just flour soup. As you can see, there's no real science to this at this point. We're just going to keep this mixing until I get a dough coming together. This might take several minutes, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to get this done, and then we'll come back to the next step. I'll see you shortly. Okay, and we're back. And the dough has now come in to become a very loose dough, but dough nonetheless. You can tell when it's starting to grab onto that bread hook. So we're going to tilt this out into a floured surface. Because we've got about 4 cups of flour in here right now. But during the kneading process, we're going to end up getting a little bit more. Get as much of that out as I can. Get some flour on top. And have you washed your hands? Wash your hands before you do this. And we're just going to start kind of getting this dough to come together as dough. So it looks like a dough ball instead of just a pile of goo. And I got to knead it. It's had some kneading in the KitchenAid, but it's going to get more here now as I'm working it. Now, the dough hook has done most of the kneading for me. So I don't have to knead this for 6-10 minutes like you might if you're doing this by hand. But I still want to do some. And those of you with a keen eye might see that I was a ceramics major in college because I have a clay maker, a potter's way of kneading. the same way that we would set up our clay for getting on a wheel. But I'm just stretching this out, kneading it up, getting more dough onto more flour onto it so that it isn't sticky. And once it feels smooth and pliable all the way through, then I'm going to switch to putting it into a greased bowl, and we're going to let it rise. So another couple of seconds here, and this is going to be ready. Boop, 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 boop. Get myself a little bit more of that flour. So this probably ends up being about 4 1/4 cups of flour in this batch for this to look the way that I want it, which is pretty much just like this. See, it's a dough ball now. It's not sticky. It's sitting there. Now this is going to start doing what bread does, or dough does, and it's going to start rising. So I'm going to wash my hands, and then I'm going to I guess I'm going to put this in my container first, then I'm going to wash my hands, and then we have to let it rest for an hour. After an hour's rest, we will come back and we'll be ready for the next step. So I happen to have another one of these bowls, and it is greased on the inside. So I'm going to take the dough, place it down in, and then they say flip it so the whole area is greased. And then I happen to have a lid that fits this, so I'm just going to loosely cover it with a lid, as you can see. So that way nothing's going to get onto it, and it can quietly rise. You want to put this in a warm place in your house. I'm going to put it by the oven, but not on the oven, so that it can rest and rise. And it should double within that hour. All right, so I'm going to get myself washed up and get ready, and I will see you in an hour. All right, it's been an hour, and we have rise. If you look now, there's a whole lot more bread in there, isn't there? So we're going to tilt this out onto our silicone mat, and there's some flour here because it's gotten all soft again. And we got to kind of beat it down to get the air out of it. And then I'm going to cut this in half because we're going to make 2 loaves out of this. That one goes there, this one's here. Just give it a quick knead. And then I'm going for French bread. So we're going to make a snake just like you did as a little kid with Play-Doh. Perfect. And we're trying to get it about 12 inches in length. And since I've got a 12-inch diameter here on my cutting board, or my silicone board, I can pretty easily figure out if I'm there yet. And then I take a greased baking sheet and we'll place it on top. Here comes the second one. This goes on as well. And now we're going to cover these and let them rise again for another 20 minutes. I will see you then. Okay, our second rise is now completed. So I'm going to unveil our loaves. As you can see, they've doubled in size or increased in size again. And all those little wrinkles that they had and creases, as the dough moisturized itself basically and rose, it filled them all in, and it's back to being just kind of a straight up look. So now it looks like a loaf of bread, or it looks like a pair of loaves of bread. So what we need to do, remember, wash your hands. I've got a 450 degree oven preheated here. I'm going to take my knife and I'm going to cut 3 or 4 scores, depending on how big these are, down the top. And then I'm going to take some water, and I'm just going to give it a little spritz because I want this dough to be crunchy, kind of crusty. And then here's that teaspoon of cornmeal, which we're going to put over the top, and we'll flip it, hit the bottom as well, and then flip it back. This is just going to kind of help the, help the bread so it doesn't stick to the pan. And if you've ever noticed when you get a loaf of bread from the bakery, they have, it's got that grit on it. That is this cornmeal. And that is good as cornmealed up, back in place. And we're going to do the back of this one. Perfect. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to give this just 3 more minutes to kind of reinflate because I had to play with it. And then it's going to go right into the oven. And we're going to go for 15 minutes. And at 15 minutes, we're going to start checking. I'm looking for it to look like finished bread. It should be browned and not burnt and looking crusty and nice. So we're going to just finish this off, and I will get back to you as soon as we have finished bread. And we're back, and the bread is just freshly out of the oven. And I did 2 variations on what we had. One, since I had 2 loaves, I took one of the loaves and I brushed it 10 minutes in. Once there was a crust formed on it, I brushed it with butter, and then I left the other one unbrushed. So you can see the difference. Those are 2 main variations you'll see people do when they're baking bread. So let's bring the loaves over. Bare hands back in play. So here are the loaves. The loaf on this side did not get butter added to it. The loaf on this side did. You can see how it's a little bit glossier. But other than that, they are the same bread. Let's place this off to the side. Get ourselves a cutting board out. And let's cut into this loaf and see what we see. Oh, that's my... It also, it smells like a certain sandwich-style restaurant, like a certain sandwich-style restaurant where you can get sandwiches made. It smells like the inside of one of those right now. And look at the steam coming off of this bread. That is still very, very hot. But you can see that came out really, really nice. It's spongy, but it's crusty on the outside, and oh, it just smells amazing. And, with bread, you can literally do anything with it. So you can take, and this is also, if you know this, how to make bread just like this, you would call this like an Italian loaf or maybe a French loaf, but not a baguette. But if you can do this, everything else is a variation on this. I mean, that's not 100% true because there's lots of types of bread out there. But if you got this, if you can get this down, you are well on your way to be able to making all kinds of bread. So what I say is, there you have it. Give it a try. Use them with something. Surprise your family. Now, one other thing you can do, if you have just this recipe, you could easily get these molded pans. Like if you ever look at that particular sandwich restaurant, their pans that they bake the bread in have got slots and they're raised, so it allows it, when you put the dough in, it will rise a certain way to make that perfect every time roll. Now, if that's what you're looking for, I'm sure certain large internet providers could find one of those for you very easily. But you can certainly just use your baking sheets that you have at home, and this bread looks just fine. And oh man, does it smell good. Anyhow, thank you for the suggestion, and I hope this helped the person who asked the suggestion. And for the rest of you, I hope you learned something too. And I hope to see you all again. Keep sending me comments, hit like and subscribe, and I will see you next time.